new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning in to the podcast, I welcome you and I hope that today's episode is one that will have you coming back for more content. And if you're a returning listener or viewer of the podcast, as always, I welcome you back and I hope that today's episode is one that you find informative, enlightening, and as always, insightful. So before we get to our main event, to my listeners who are on YouTube, please make sure you hit the red subscribe button so you can get future notifications on new episodes. We're also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all other audio streaming platforms. So if you listen to the podcast from there, make sure you subscribe there as well. And then, of course, we are always welcoming any folks who are helping us contribute to this platform monetarily. So if you'd like to submit a donation through any of these channels, whether it's Cash App, which is our main handle, and that is $IDTALK4ED, Venmo, where our handle is at KwameSM, and then PayPal, where you can use the URL PayPal.me/KwameSM. So that's for our one-time donations. Now, for my day one listeners, for those who have been with the Identity Talk community for a while, and you know what's up, you can go on Patreon today. So we have a whole Patreon community there. You can become a patron and join a community where you'll get exclusive perks. So that would include early access videos. You'll get some behind the scenes content on things that we're working on with Identity Talk and other projects that I'm working on. So if you're someone that wants to learn a little bit more about me and the work of Identity Talk, then Patreon is where you want to be. Make sure you go on the website and join the community there. And then, of course, if you would like to catch up on past and watch future episodes of the podcast, you can go to our main website at IdentityTalk4Educators.com. Now, for those who are looking for a new book to add to the library, I have my book coming out through Routledge called Learn to Relearn, Supporting Identity in the Culture Affirming Classroom. And I just got the full cover reveal from Stenhouse and Routledge, and it looks amazing. I cannot wait to show it off to people when the book finally comes out in November. This has been 3 years in the making, and I honestly can't wait. The fact that it's less than 2 months away is just surreal. And it's going to be coming out to the world very soon. So in the meantime, if you want to learn more about the book, you can go to the book's main website at learntorelearn.com. Over there, you'll be able to check out the chapters as well as some of the accompanying learning resources that go with each chapter. And then to pre-order your copy, you can go on the main website on Amazon, or you can go to the Routledge or Stenhouse websites to get your pre-order copy today. And that'll get out to you in November when the book finally comes out. As always, thank you all for the support. Can't wait to talk more about this book. All right, y'all. So today, have another guest, and I'm thoroughly excited to bring this person on. She is somebody who I've had a chance to follow on social media for quite a while, and she's doing phenomenal work in the UK within the realm of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging in our schools. And she's somebody who's with a wealth of knowledge and is truly about the work and is about what we do here at Identity Talk as far as how we focus on intersectionality, identity, and making sure that everybody is seen regardless of where they come from and what identity markers they bring to the table. She is all about it. And I'm just so happy and also honored to have her on. So without further ado, I want to bring on Miss Hannah Wilson to talk with us about her story, her life, and the work that she's currently doing right now. So let's go ahead and bring on Hannah.
Hello, Kwame.
Hello.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, awesome to have you. And I know you've been doing a lot of traveling, a lot of moving around. So are you currently back in your humble abode?
I'm in my home in Bath in the UK for three more nights. And then I'm going to Dubai for 10 days on Sunday.
See, we cannot catch up with you. You just on the move all the time. So, listen, before you get on another plane, let me make sure I maximize every minute of our time together. No, you were raised in Devon in the UK. So humble beginnings. I know your parents, when they had you real young, but they were able to manage and make sure that you became the wonderful human being you are today. So I'm gonna let you go ahead and fill in the blanks and just tell us about what life was like growing up in Devon and what it was like to be around your parents growing up.
I love that you remembered those facts from our call a couple of weeks ago.
I do the research.
I'm impressed, Kwame. So I was brought up in Devon from the age of 3, 4. So for people who don't know UK geography, it's in the West Country, in the southwest of England. It's quite rural. It's very beautiful. We've got moorlands. We've got coastline. So I moved there, and it's where my parents had originally met, but they had lived in some other places. And I spent my childhood there from 3 to 18. I went to an infant school, a junior school, a secondary school, and then a post-16 college. And I think like making the link between my upbringing and identity talks, it's a white majority space in the UK. So there wasn't a lot of racial diversity when I was growing up in the town I lived in the school I went to. And that's something I became more and more aware of. And I became aware of it because my parents gave us the opportunity to travel, and we were taken to some great places. I was also an avid reader. My parents really brought reading into my life, and we went to the library every Saturday for most of my childhood. And I read books that took me around the world. And I think those two pieces together made me more and more conscious, more and more aware of what was lacking in my school experience. And I became quite a vocal English student. And I wasn't very happy about what I was being taught. And I became quite disengaged with English lit. And even though that's my favourite subject, because I was basically studying dead white men. It wasn't what I wanted to be studying. So that's, I guess, the kind of the backdrop to what's made me care is that it was important to me as a white person to be having a curriculum and a literature that was diverse, but it's as important for other people to see themselves in that literature as well. So I chose to go and read post-colonial literature at university, and I spent 3 years doing a deep dive into diverse voices and diverse stories, and everyone wasn't a dead white man. So I spent 3 years celebrating the kind of literature that I wanted to be reading.
As you were going through your schooling, you didn't have any exposure to this literature. So you were somebody, I'm assuming, who was pursuing it on your own. You were discovering these sources.
The first teacher who actually exposed me was my A-level teacher, Sally. And we studied Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings when I was 17. And that's my genre, like Black female authors. That's what I studied most of my degree. That's why I absolutely love reading. And I wouldn't have perhaps gone down that genre had it not been for Sally introducing me when I was 17. But that became my real passion for the kind of the types of genres I was reading moving forward.
And then in thinking about your primary and secondary schooling, I'm wondering if you experienced any struggles, whether it be internally or externally, that made it difficult for you to embrace who you were fully, not just in school, but in other spaces you occupied.
It's an interesting question. Okay, so I think the bits of my identity that have impacted me or made me aware of who I am, I've always been the tallest person in every class. I'm 6'1", 186 centimeters tall. Like I'm tall. So my height has always been a feature, and it's always been commented on, and it's quite hard to hide or be invisible when you're 6'1". So I think my height has always been a very important part of my identity. I'm not so much of a redhead now, but I was ginger when I was a kid. And I know like Americans love redheads. In the UK, you get a lot of grief for being a ginger. So my hair colour was also something that came up a lot as well. So I think being a tall person, being a confident person, and being a redheaded person, there was quite a lot of assumptions and biases and stereotypes that I had to navigate because people assumed I was going to behave in a certain way. Like I'm quite cool, calm and collected. I don't get angry. I don't get into fights. But people assume that because I was taller and a redhead, that I might be quite a fire. So that's been an interesting piece throughout my life to navigate.
And as I was just learning more about your journey, I can recall you talking about how when you were in headship, how your height could be seen as an advantage. because when you think about positionality, particularly at the headship position, you're already in a position of authority. Now you add that layer of being tall, that could be intimidating to certain students, maybe even some of your staff members, since you're in that high position. So I was wondering if that was something that you experienced in that position.
Not so much, because I don't think my personality is intimidating. I think my height definitely served me. That I've worked in a lot of all-boys schools. I took on a lot of pastoral roles. I was often the member of staff on the field sorting out a fight because I was tall enough and I could kind of handle myself, but the boys really respected me as well. I do think I got promoted quickly because I was tall. I've worked in quite challenging schools, and I think there's a misconception that taller people, bigger people are perhaps better at behaviour management. And some of the best behaviour managers I've seen have been 5'1" Muslim women with a hijab who control a whole schoolyard with their eyes. They don't even open their mouth. So I think there was things there that I were part of my leadership, I guess, identity and personality that I took for granted at times. And I then spoke to colleagues, particularly women who are petiter than I, who had to work a lot harder to be seen and heard in lessons or to be on duty. So I think that's something I became more aware of. I'm not sure whether my height was an issue really being a head teacher. I generally wear flat shoes. So like I'm usually in flat shoes. So I'm not like a tall person who then wears heels as well. I think perhaps a handful of the dads had an issue with my height. I think it was probably more an insecurity about their own height. And it wasn't something I was consciously doing. I think as a tall person, as a confident person, you sometimes inadvertently trigger someone else's insecurity, but I'm quite aware of that as well. I've always been someone who's been quite conscious of my size and my height. So like when I'm in a classroom environment, I always sort of like kneel down, crouch down, like go to the level of the child. So I would hope that, touch wood, that not many children I've encountered in my 20 years of being a teacher would say that I was an intimidating member of staff. I think sometimes some people might have liked me to be more intimidating, but that's just not who I am.
And then also, I know when you and I talked off air, you mentioned that your parents allowed you to travel to different places. And one of the places you mentioned to me was Ghana. So, of course, with my family being from Ghana, that was very interesting to me. And I was like, that's what's up. So I want you to tell me how that trip to Ghana had an impact on your life in general, and how it's played a role in the foundation that you were able to build as someone who does DEIB work.
That's such a good question. My first visit to Africa was actually to Kenya. I went to Kenya for my dad's 40th when I was like 15. And I think that gave me the bug for Africa. Africa's my favourite continent, so by far. I've actually travelled quite extensively in Africa, and I've always looked for opportunities to go back to the continent. So going with my family to Kenya when I was 15, 16, then when I was looking for opportunities in my gap year, I took a year off between 18 and 19. I found this opportunity to go and spend 12 weeks in a country. And there were different choices. You could go to South America, you could go to, I think it was India. I chose Ghana because I wanted to go back to that continent. And I had such an amazing summer there. And we weren't in one spot for the whole trip. We got to travel around quite a lot. We went to the capital, Accra. We went to the rainforest. We went to the coast. We went up into the bush. We went to the savannah. Like I really felt like I saw quite a large proportion of the country. And I wasn't traveling by myself, but I was with a group. But I'd sign up by myself. I don't tend to do things with friends. I like to sign up and go and meet new people. I just found the Ghanaian people so warm and so friendly and so open. And it was really immersive. So I think that basically really then endorsed the fact that I wanted to do this degree in post-colonial literature, and I wanted to be reading sort of like beyond my own little bubble. And there was a book I read whilst I was out there called Paradise by Professor Abdulrazak Gurna, and he had just been nominated for the Booker Prize, and he was actually going to be a lecturer at my university. So it felt like the stars were all aligned, that I was kind of like in Africa reading a book about Tanzania. This author was going to be my lecturer. I don't know, it definitely felt like there was alignment and synergy. And I think that then just really informed who I became as a teacher. I've worked predominantly in London, predominantly in schools with a high proportion of global majority or black students, and it definitely gave me a different lens, a different awareness, because all my students with Ghanaian roots were always dead impressed that I'd actually been to their country. So I think it creates that resonance as well, that you've been to places that are important to your students.
And we know that London in general is just a melting pot. So I have an uncle who lives in London, specifically in the Leeds area. So I'm not sure where that is.
Leeds is up north, mate. It's not in London.
Up north.
It's in the north.
Maybe the neighborhood is called Leeds something, but he was
possibly
in London. Maybe Leeds Avenue. I can't remember, but he is in London currently. So we know that it's a melting pot, and you're going into different schools that pretty much have majority Black and brown students. So what I'm interested in knowing is, during your years, specifically as a classroom teacher, so even before you got into the headship positions, what were some of the things that you noticed early on that helped to propel you into your DEIB journey?
Question. I think I noticed, so my second school, I was in my second, third and fourth year of teaching, and I picked up responsibility as a head of year. And I really became acutely aware of the lack of representation in the staff body. And we were teaching all boys, predominantly boys of colour, but then the staff were all white. We were actually really female heavy. It was quite interesting. It was a female heavy staff. All the heads of the year were female. I can remember teaching a year 11 class, like a brilliant group of 30, 16-year-old boys, and one of the lads saying, like mid activity, "Miss, do you realise you're the only white person in the room?" I was like, "Thank you very much for bringing my awareness to that. I had noticed. Have you noticed I'm the only woman in the room?" And they all chuckled. It was interesting that there was an awareness piece there. I absolutely love working there. We had a lot of rapport. I still get messages from some of those boys now who are now adults with their own family. I then moved schools, and I went into a more senior male leadership role in a much bigger school a little bit further in London. And the thing that really stays with me from my time there was that the school had been in like chaos, it had been in disarray, and there was quite a lot of behavioural issues, and they'd recruited a lot of us to go in. And going back to my height, I think I got the job because I was tall and loud and confident, and they wanted to get calm in the school. But every time I walked through a corridor, up a stairwell into another part of a building, I often bumped into like interactions that jarred me, where there was a 6'3", 6'4" white man shouting at a 5'10", 5'11" black boy. And often there was an exchange about the child disrespecting the adult because the child was looking at the floor and the adult wanted the child to look at them. Right. And I had to sort of mediate quite a lot of these situations and bring awareness to the fact that, so with the greatest respect, he is showing you respect. He's looking at the floor. That's how he's showing you respect. He's been brought up not to eyeball you. And like there was a lack of conscious awareness, of racial awareness there, racial consciousness, that actually culturally he was showing respect, but the white person didn't appreciate that the black child was showing respect by looking at the ground. And I think that made me also consider, like at this point, I'm talking like 2010, 2011, cultural competence, cultural consciousness wasn't really a term used in the UK. It wasn't, anti-racism wasn't being talked about. So I think that began to also sort of like begin to seep into my awareness about some of the problematic ways that schools are set up and run.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, around 2010, 2011, didn't the Equality Act come out around that time?
2010.
Okay, 2010. So at the very least, there was an awareness that, all right, we need to really have a focus on making schools more equitable through this act. But in terms of the execution of how that would go and the professional development piece, that was still something that was in progress.
Oh, yeah, really early days, Kwame. Like that's when the Equality Act got introduced. That's when we started logging things like homophobia and racism. We have to, in a UK state school, you have to have a homophobia log and a racism log, and all behavioural incidents and prejudicial incidents under those two categories are logged.
That's a section 28 though, right? The section 28?
No, section 28 is different. So Section 28 is the legislation that prohibited anybody in education and health from recognising, talking and teaching about anyone who was LGBTQ. So that was in a similar kind of time period, but schools have to log incidents of homophobia and race. So my point is that it's like a reactivity. We're logging the things that are happening so we can
And not being
report them.
proactive.
But it's not proactive. Like that's
Gotcha.
I think that's the change I've seen in the last 20, 25 years, and particularly in the last 5 years, as we know, because there's been much more commitment to anti-racism in the last 5 years specifically. We're now looking at what do we need to do to preempt and prevent and be proactive rather than letting things go wrong and reacting and sanctioning. So I think we were still in very, very early days at that point.
Right. Because for you, because you've had the exposure, you traveled to countries that were predominantly Black or of people of a diaspora. You already had a sense of what it is outside of Devon, outside of London. So a lot of your colleagues are coming in not having that same type of exposure or experience. So then the question is, how are they able to build their capacity, particularly around that time period?
And it wasn't a training theme then. Like I taught in 6 schools over 20 years. I don't think I've ever had any anti-racist training. So I've had training on other things. And then coming ahead, I brought in training around some of the identity pieces that we need to be really aware of. We did a big piece in my school about gender identity and gender expression because we had a number of non-binary pupils. Mm-hmm. It's only since leaving headship, and I've been out for 5 years, I've done more training and more learning and more awareness building in the last 5 years since being out, because as we know, the reality of being at the chalk face in a school, there's often not a lot, I'm not making excuses here, but there's often not a lot of time for staff training. And there needs to be more prioritization of training for such topics as anti-racism, for sure.
And then during that time period, have you seen an evolution as far as teachers being a bit more politically conscious about how some of the DEIB work that we're trying to do in schools is manifesting within the social political realm of the UK?
Wow. I think I'd love to say there was an evolution or a revolution. I wouldn't say we're there. I would say that in the last few years, the surface has been scratched. Some schools are doing good work, and that work's becoming great work and like embedded work. But a lot of schools are very, very early on their journey. I don't think a week goes by that I don't get an email from a member of staff or a senior leader or a parent about an incident that's identity-based harm. I've had one today from a parent of a child who's experiencing racism and isn't very happy with the response their school gave them. We've got a long way to go, a long way. And because of how education is currently structured and the system works in the UK, it's so splintered now that there's not necessarily like consistent commitments to things like this. So you then have like pockets of good practice, but you have massive areas where it's not even on their radar yet, Kwame.
So this is very interesting to me because, Hannah, you do so much. And as I've already mentioned, you're traveling all over and you see all these things happening. And when you look at when Diversity Educators was founded during the COVID period, and then I'm looking at Women Ed, which happened before that, I would think, given what you were exposed to, diverse educators would have came first before Women Ed. So I guess my question would be, what got you thinking about prioritizing, maybe not prioritizing, but thinking about gender equality before you got to the DEIB work that you now do with diverse educators?
That is a really good question. Okay. I've not been asked that question before, and I've done a lot of podcasts. Why did Women Ed come first? I think Women Ed came first because if we think about representation in the sector, it's an inequity and inequality that impacts a high proportion of people. So in the UK, 2/3 of all teachers are women. A third of all heads are women. I was going more senior as an assistant head teacher. There was 2 women on SLT. As a vice principal, I was the only woman on SLT. And I was looking for visible role models, and I was looking to build my network of female leaders. So I joined Twitter, as we now know it as X, and I began networking. So Women Ed, it actually sounds quite selfish even articulating this. It was about my own needs at that point, that as a female leader coming up the ladder, what I needed was support with being a female leader and navigating quite a patriarchal system. But it very quickly, I became very conscious of the fact that we were centering a white majority feminist lens. I can remember having some quite robust discussions about that. I can remember our second conference, so we did an annual conference, one in London, and then our second one was in Reading. I can remember there being like a breakout group where a group of women of colour wanted to talk about their experience being women of colour in the system. And they didn't go to a workshop, they created their own circle, and they did it in quite a public space. Other people came to join them. Wow. And they wanted to, it was almost a kind of an act of resistance in itself, that they wanted to talk about it. It wasn't on the schedule. They created a space and others came. And I sat and I listened, and it made me really think about the fact that, yes, I'm navigating sexism and gender inequality. For a lot of my peers, they're navigating racism and homophobia and ableism. So that's something that really landed with me. So that's why Women Ed came first. I did Women Ed for 3 years, and I then stepped back because I was about to become a principal. So I became a principal, and within, 6 months of being a principal, we started Diverse Ed. And the reason why we started Diverse Educators, and you might have heard me telling you this story before, I'd recruited a brilliantly diverse team because I was talking at events and networking. I ended up with this more diverse school than any school I've worked at, and we were in Oxfordshire, not London. And my deputy head teacher and I were on gate duty one morning, and Benny and I had known each other for a while, and we were having a candid conversation about what events we were going to. And she just said to me, and she can't even remember this conversation. She said to me, tongue in cheek, "Oh, lucky you, you're going to Women Ed. You get to go to what event, Han?" I was like, right. And she goes, "I've got to go to 4. I've got to go Women Ed this weekend, BAME Ed next weekend, LGBT Ed the weekend after, and now I've got a hearing impairment. I better go to Disability Ed." Because at that point, there were these 4 like grassroots groups, and it stopped me in my tracks. Like it really sat with me that I have a privilege about taking my whole self to an event and talking about Hannah in her wholeness. And Benny had to cut herself in 4 and go to 4 events. So I went home and thought about it and came back the next day and suggested that we held an event at our school. And that's how Diverse Ed was conceived, that we were networking and supporting those other groups, and we invited them all to come to us, and we hosted one event. I think 250 people came to our first Saturday conference. They travelled from all over the country because they wanted to be in the room. They wanted to be talking about a kind of a holistic, intersectional, cohesive, coherent approach to diversity, equity, inclusion. And that was back in 2017. So we've kind of moved the conversation forwards year by year since then.
So this season, Identity Talk for Educators Live will be including ad spots for businesses, products, and events that are adding significant value to their communities. And here's the catch. You don't have to be an educator or an education-based business to be a part of this. We're looking for people who are just doing great work in the community, and we want to use our platform as a way to amplify their work. So if you are an entrepreneur or you know of an entrepreneur who is doing just that, bring them in our direction. Have them reach out to us. If they want to learn more about their ad spots and how they can get themselves promoted on this platform, they can contact myself, Kwame at identitytalkforeducators.com. I'll say it one more time. It is Kwame at identitytalkforeducators.com. Hope to hear from you, and let's keep on amplifying our work and building each other up. And this actually leads me to my next question. So in thinking about diverse educators, and you mentioned Benny's story about how I got to break myself into 4 pieces just to attend these different events. So you're now speaking to the intersectional nature of certain people's identities. So we mentioned the racism, we've mentioned the colorism, we've mentioned ableism, sexism. There's so many isms that we're trying to attack, and we don't have the ability to combat all these different injustices. So it requires folks who have had those lived experiences and they have the expertise to be able to facilitate professional development on how to combat these different issues. So, as a leader, could you describe the process of building a diverse team of consultants who are able to touch on those different identity marks? Because I feel like that would be necessary in order to build a team that can touch on everything. And I feel like you all have done a pretty good job of being intentional about that.
That's another really good question, because you don't want to be recruiting people and bringing people in tokenistically because they tick a box, because they've got an identity you've not got on the team.
Right.
I kind of cut it two different ways. So 6 months after being independent, I was at capacity. There was lots of work coming my way. I do lots of leadership training. I do lots of coaching. I was beginning to do more and more DEI training. But I'll come back to the bits I do and don't do as a white straight woman when it comes to the DEI training. And I was networking lots, and I was meeting people, and I'm really about my values and about like values alignment. So I'm always looking out for people who I think are great public speakers, really good at relationship building, but also have that values alignment. So I met a couple of people quite early on who were also post-headship, also freelancing, also looking to find their kind of their niche. And a couple of them joined me quite early on. And they were also ex-heads. They were coming in at that level of understanding a whole school approach, thinking quite strategically, thinking about how to leverage your power with your governors, how to bring the different stakeholders in. So at that point, it was myself and then Adrian and Audrey, and they're both Black and former head teachers. So the three of us were doing quite a lot of work early on. Benny was around, but she was still working in a school at this point. So she had quite limited capacity. And her specialism was really the kind of the curriculum piece. So any curriculum work went to her. And then the three of us were doing quite a lot of the kind of the leadership work. And what I find with how we do the work, like I see myself as the door opener. Like I open the door, I start the conversation. I quite often do the training with the SLT or the governing body to get the awareness going. But then what you often get is as there's a reception to the work and awareness grows, they realise they've got big gaps in their knowledge, and they begin to ask for training on specific things. And I wouldn't run training on gender identity. I wouldn't run training on anti-racism. I wouldn't run training on challenging homophobia or creating an LGBT-friendly school. So I began to look specifically for the trainers who had the lived experience, but also the skills, the training skills and the leadership experience to do the work that my schools and trusts and colleges needed to like almost like build the kind of the blocks, the kind of the modules. So I brought a couple of people on quite early on who could do training on neurodiversity, could do training on trans awareness. And then it's a bit chicken and egg. Like I then watch and see what patterns and trends are coming up in the curriculum, in the news, in policy, but also requests from clients. And then I begin to find people. So menopause awareness is massive. And I found somebody who was a menopause awareness trainer. So I have this kind of umbrella approach, I guess, that I think I'm good at like building the community and getting the brand out there and helping people to step in. But I'm very aware that I'm not best placed to always do all the conversations and do all the training.
And I think that's a very humble approach because, I mean, you're someone that clearly has done the work. You continue to do the work. You're self-reflective, and you're always trying to learn how you can be a better ally and how you can learn about these different identity markers. So it's not like you don't have those funds of knowledge, but I think being a white cis hetero woman, you recognize, well, you know what? Even though I may have those funds of knowledge, my presence could be a distraction to people. So let me get some folks who do not look like me to do the same training, because that message can be delivered in a way that I may not be able to deliver it, even though I already have that skill set in my tool belt.
There's that. There's also that I think sometimes I'm the easy option. Like a lot of heads look like me. So there's a safety, there's a comfortableness with me.
That's true.
They will say, oh, can you come and run the training? And I'll say, with the greatest respect, no, I'm not going to run your anti-racism training. My anti-racist trainer will come and run that training. Oh, would we like it if it was you, Hannah? No, I'm not sending a white person to come and run anti-racist training. You need to hear it from someone with lived experience. So I do quite a lot of pushback, that my allyship is often behind the scenes. I give people a lot of grief about conferences, about lineups, events, about lineups, choices. Like I'll say, I won't come and talk at your event, but one of my team will, because I've noticed that all of your speakers are white. Or I've noticed that all of your speakers who I'm familiar with are straight. Like, would you like me to help you diversify your lineup? So that's how I kind of like bring some challenge, but also have the allyship that I've got a brilliant team and I want to be amplifying them and platforming them and making sure that they're getting into the room. And we talk quite a lot as a team, that I also know that I can get away with saying things because I am a white straight woman that they couldn't get away with saying in the room. So we talk about, we do debrief and talk about that quite a lot as well. Sometimes I am the person who needs to go and do the training because I can be quite sort of like straight shooting. And sometimes they do need quite a stark message. But we're quite mindful of who's the best personality fit sometimes for the context as well.
So you mentioned that you can be a straight shooter. You can be very candid and transparent in your approach. I'm wondering, when you first started to engage in this work, have you seen yourself grow in terms of how you disrupt? Because we know that disruption can happen in different ways. There's a more overt approach where it's like we're flipping tables, we're letting you know that we're here. But then there's a disruption that happens behind the scenes that's more systematic, that you're doing through people, right? So I'm wondering how that approach has diversified over time.
Another really good question. I would say I've always been quite disruptive, but I see myself as being a positive disruptor. Like I'm not disrupting for the sake of disrupting. I am a critical friend to all the organizations I've worked in. I am the person who answers all the curious questions. Like I'm the irritant a lot of the time. I'm asking the questions, why? Like until I understand it, I can't do it kind of thing. But I think some of my line managers found me quite challenging because I am confident, direct. I will say what everyone's thinking. I get myself into trouble sometimes because I will be the person who will deliver the message, but everyone else has been thinking the message, but I'm the one confident enough to go and deliver it. So I think that was very much my brand when I was working in schools and trusts. It sometimes got me into hot water. And ironically, the more senior I got, the more people tried to control me. And like I've always been on social media, I've blogged, I've spoken at events, I'm really professional. I take a lot of responsibility in what I say and what I do. But the more senior I got, people tried to like almost like contain me and handcuff me. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to work for myself. I feel like I can now be more disruptive to the system by being adjacent to the system rather than in the system. And I think the irony now is I get invited in and get paid to be a critical friend. And people want to hear my thoughts and want the feedback and want the critique. Whereas beforehand, they just wanted me to go away and be quiet.
And how has the socio-political scene within the UK, how's that influence not only the work that you're doing, but your ability to even get work and obtain contracts?
That's an interesting question. That there is, as we know, like our country's in a bit of a mess at the moment. We've had a really difficult summer. There's a lot of values clashes within the country. There's lots of political tensions within the country. But we, like, how my team, we're all on the same page. Like, we're just busy doing the work. Like, for me, it's actually like the work needs to be done. A lot of people are talking about the work, but we're doing the work. And I think for me, it's like about chipping away. And it's about finding your way in. So going back to the question about disruption and advocacy, I have got a massive network, and my network's very diverse, but it's very female heavy. So yes, it's intersectional. White men don't necessarily gravitate. Okay, so something that I've
Wonder why.
Something I've consciously committed to in the last few years is I need to change who I am and how I talk and how I show up to bring the white men into the conversation, because they need to be part of the conversation. And I'm always curious when I do get a message from a white male CEO or white male head teacher. And my observation is that they're often primary school head teachers or primary school heads who are now CEOs or special school heads. So yes, they're white men, but they've got an inclusion kind of like vein in them. So that's something I'm consciously doing, that I want to be in the room with the people who are the decision makers. And sometimes it's me who needs to change what I'm doing and how I'm saying it to get into the room to get their attention.
And as someone who also trained and you focus on leaders and people who are leading schools and are responsible for faculty members, how do those 3 Ps, so we talking privilege, positionality, and power, how do they influence the way that you even do your trainings, the ones that you're facilitating? And you did start to talk about that a little bit, but I'd love for you to expound on that a little bit more, because I think that's important.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually having a chat with someone in India on LinkedIn this morning, and she had shared the wheel of power and privilege that comes up quite a lot. And I do use that in my training as a stimulus, as a provocation, but with a lot of caveats about how problematic it is as well. That it's a way into the conversation, but it's not, for me, like the done deal. But I think it helps people unpack those 3 terms, that a lot of people don't like to be told they've got privilege and don't like to sit in that discomfort of talking about it. And I think I do create a psychologically safe space where we can talk about it. I build it into the session. We get to the point where I've kind of like created a space where we can have a more difficult conversation, a more open conversation. It's always really interesting what comes up. They don't often like the link between privilege and power, and the assumption that some identities hold privilege, which then give you power. That is often where it gets a little bit tense. But what I try to do is then share personal anecdotes about my own identity, my own journey. Like, I'll talk about me compared to Benny. We talk quite a lot about applying for headship. Same age, same degree, same subject. She's got better grades than me. And I got headship in my second interview. And the only difference really is that I'm white. So I've had less ceilings to butt up against. So I think bringing in anecdotes like that anchors it in the room, and people can't then shy away from it. And I often get lots of people come and talk to me in a coffee break about what's resonating, but also people come and talk to me about what's jarring as well. I think positionality is perhaps a newer theme that people don't often think and talk about yet. I'd probably bring that more in a specific like leadership session. And I think it's like a lot of people don't appreciate that it's actually their position, their status in the hierarchy that gives them power and privilege. And are they leveraging that, and are they using their platform, or are they like we use the expression in the UK, shutting the trap door? Like, are you opening the door and bringing people up, or are you shutting the door and keeping people out? And the person we all would not want to be like is Margaret Thatcher, and how Margaret Thatcher led. Like, she didn't open the door for women leaders; she shut the door to keep them out. So I think for me, I weave it in, and ultimately, we often come in to do DEIB training, but really we're doing leadership training. Really, we're doing culture training. Really, we're doing language training, and you kind of like peel back the layers to get to some of those other aspects of school life.
And I always feel like it's always a good entry point, because privileges, as we know, they're not just earned, they could be unearned as well. So you can earn privileges just based on your level of education. I got a master's degree, I got a doctoral degree, so therefore I'm in position to access these other opportunities compared to someone who doesn't have that. Like, I earned that. I spent my money for my education to get these degrees. So like, that's just an example of how, yes, this is an earned privilege. So privilege is not something that is always bad. And I think when you try to provide those examples that don't tie into the different identity markers, then people are just more receptive generally to that. And then the point that you made about positionality, which I believe is a very valid point. The example you gave about you being conscious of your height and you're crouching or kneeling so that you're at a height that's level to your students, that's an example of just being aware of where you are and being aware of how your presence may be perceived by some of your students. That's such an important skill that I think a lot of us tend to overlook in leadership.
Yeah, I'll just add to that something I became really conscious of when I became a head teacher was the power and positionality of situational leadership. That I became a head teacher on January the 1st. So up until December the 31st, I was a deputy head. Hannah did not change overnight on the 31st to the 1st. And I'm not lying to you. I became a head teacher. I got 2 invitations that week to really important events, to like dinner parties with very influential people. And the only reason I got the invite was because I was now a head teacher. And I think things like that are interesting about like what, and I was ahead for 3 years and I've not been ahead for 5. And being ahead gives me credibility to get into some rooms. And I know that some of my colleagues doing DEI work who haven't got to senior leadership, that can be a barrier.
Yep.
But then let's ask the question of why didn't they get to senior leadership? And it's often their identity that's been the barrier to them getting into the room to get the opportunity. So I think there's an interesting tension there about who gets to be a leader and who gets to then train the leaders as well.
Oh, let's take that there, because I want to translate that thought into DEI consultancies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about post George Floyd,
Mm-hmm.
it was an outrage around the world. Oh my goodness, look what's going on in Minnesota in the United States. We got to do something about this. So we're going to start some DEIB offices here. We're going to add some DEIB positions in our schools and districts. We're going to make sure that we have a mission statement for our NGO organization. And we're going to bring people on to talk about anti-racism and all these issues. And you see that there's a lot of white people who are taking on those positions. And some may have done some, maybe like a Robin DiAngelo. You've done the research, you've done certain things, but maybe you're not reinvesting back into those communities that you are being an ally for. So I'm wondering, with regard to positionality, have you seen situations where, okay, you may be getting a contract at this school or this district, but you may know some colleagues who are of color and you're like, yo, they should be doing this, not me. I'm pretty good, but you got someone that can do this as well. That's right in front of you. Like, what's good?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of things on that. So, do you mean it will often go to a team member? I've got people who are anti-racist trainers, so it will be them who goes to do the work. But some of them are absolutely at capacity because there's so much work. A couple of the things I've then developed on the website. So we've got something called the DEI directory. So I'm a big networker, as you know. For the last 5 years, I've grown this directory. And we've got 212 organizations on the website at the moment from A to Z. But you can also nominate which the protected characteristics you are supporting. So you can go into the race section, and I think there's 18 organizations. So when I get a contact from an organization or from anyone for a bit of work we either can't do or we're not best placed to do, I'll say, please, can you look at this part of the organization? They often say, who would you recommend? I'll say, talk to these 3 people. So I see that as a really important part of our work as well, that we're signposting out. So this Saturday, this Saturday coming, I'm hosting an event all about the global majority pipeline and workforce. And we've got 10 organizations speaking for 10 minutes each to introduce the work they're doing. Black Men Teach, Mindful Equity, Mixed Ed, Black Teacher Connect, Young Black Teachers, BAME Ed, Black Men Teach. Like there's pretty much an organization for whoever you are, whatever you're looking for. So that's me as an ally creating a platform to make sure that they are the people who are known for this work, and getting them all together at one event rather than there being 10 different events as well.
Yeah, and that's just amazing, because I think what people fail to understand is, yes, compensation is something that is deserved when doing this work, and it's heavy work, but we also know that it's always better when you're doing it in community with people who also are doing the work and maybe better suited to talk about certain issues than you're able to. That doesn't mean that you lose out on an opportunity. If anything, we're all trying to achieve the same goal. So why do we need to compete with each other?
That's the key thing, Kwame. Like I'm a real collaborator. Not everyone will agree with that, but I try really hard to build community, to collaborate, to work with people, to bring people in, to join up the dots. Like there's so much need and there's so much work. I don't think it should be competitive. We're all on the same team, and not everyone behaves like that sometimes.
Yeah, so it could be real fickle out there, unfortunately, but you still persist through all that. All right. I actually have a couple more questions to wrap us up. The first question is, at this point in your life, and you've done a lot, and you're still doing a lot. But I'm wondering if you've had a chance to take time to think about whether, number one, you're at peace with where you are, and are there certain things that you're still exploring or learning about yourself as a human being?
Goodness me, that's a big question for the end of the interview, Kwame. Am I at peace with who I am? Absolutely. I'm definitely at peace with who I am professionally and the journey I've walked to where I've got today. That I get told by my team, you're far too self-critical. I try really hard to model best practice and to be a good ally and advocate and to remove barriers. And I don't always get it right. Like no one's going to always get it right. But sometimes there's a perception or there's optics about who's she doing this work? She's a straight white woman. I've had accusations that I'm profiting from marginalised people doing DEI work, and that's really not who I am and what we do. So I think I'm constantly self-reflecting on that. I have ongoing coaching, ongoing supervision. I've got a really strong network and a really strong circle of support, and we talk these things out. They support me, I support them, and I've got a couple of people who have rung quite regularly over the last few years just to say, am I the one being an absolute twit here? Or have I read the situation wrong? I think it's really important to have those people who give you straight talking advice. So I think that's really important. I think thinking about the same question personally, I'm 45, I'm not married, I haven't got children. And they're not necessarily decisions I've made. Like life happens, doesn't it? And not everything happens the way you mapped it out. But I definitely get critique or I'm misunderstood through that part of my identity as well. I think some people think that I put my career first and at the expense of getting married, having a family. It's just it's happenstance, isn't it? About who you meet and when you meet them and everything else. Sure. So I think that's it. And like I thought by 45 I'd be married with children. I'm not. I'm actually at peace with that. But lots of my girlfriends who are in similar situations aren't, and that's always quite an interesting conversation. So that's just more of a kind of a personal response, I guess, to the question.
Hey, and there's nothing wrong with that. You live in your life. And then finally, how do you stay true to the teacher in you?
How do I say true to the teacher in me? I think like the weird thing, isn't it, about doing this work is you get like one stage removed from the children who you're ultimately in service of. And the bit I really enjoyed about being in the school was the kids. My favourite time of the day was when I was in the classroom, the drama studio, the English room, door shut. No one could like talk to me, radio me, email me, shout at me, ask me anything. Right. It was just me and the children. Like that's actually what I really miss. I miss the relationships, the rapport, the kind of the banter with the kids. And when you go into a school for a visit for a day, you never get the same kind of resonance. So that's a bit I kind of miss. But I think that I keep that as the kind of the anchor. I guess I'm still a teacher because I'm now teaching teachers rather than teaching children. So I really enjoy being a trainer and a facilitator and a coach. So if anything, like one of my parents from the school where I was a head, when I left headship, she got my number. She sent me the most beautiful text about the impact I'd had. And I was probably like 10 years too early for the school and for the community. And I think it's moments like that that really affirm you that you are on the right path, you are doing the right thing, and people are seeing it. But when I bumped into her and her husband, she said to her husband, like, Hannah had to leave our school because she's got bigger impact she can have working across lots of schools. So actually, there's that as well, isn't it? Like to be a teacher, we want to be impacting lives, we want to be improving lives, we want to be creating legacy. So I hold on to the fact that I'm doing that just in a slightly different way than perhaps when I started out my career.
Well, Hannah, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you for taking time to talk. Now you can go ahead and get on the plane to go to your next destination. Nah, kidding. Jokes. But seriously, I would love to just share with people how they can connect you on social media, even though you're not hard to find, and talk to the people about how they can connect with diverse educators and all the great work you're all doing. So floor is yours.
Sure, thank you. So we made the decision over the summer to leave X because it's not a very pleasant place to be and it's not a very safe place to be. So X was the place to find me until August. So I'm on LinkedIn, Hannah Wilson, you can find me there. But the best thing to do is to go to the website. So the website's www.diverseeducators.co.uk. In our footer on every page, you've got all of our quick links and our handles. So depending on how you want to engage, we've got a newsletter, we've got a community space on Mighty Networks. We do live streaming on StreamYard to YouTube. We've got Instagram, I don't use it very much. We've got Facebook, I don't use it very much. LinkedIn and the website, really, top 2 places to find us.
All right, y'all heard it. Connect with Hannah, connect with diverse educators, and let's do this work together. So this is a wrap, people. And on behalf of Hannah, I want to wish y'all a good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. We're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.